Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I am really happy to see you here once more. I know that I've been a little away for some time, but it has been quite difficult to try to balance life, and also the making of videos. And besides that, that I have been quite focused on the Rings of Power thing, and there has not been really something that I have been that interested in, save for two bits that happened recently. One was a couple of weeks ago or so like that, when King Theoden himself, Bernael, talked about the Rings of Power, which we are going to talk about in another video, and this piece from Screen Rant that is still trying to further the notion that there's something to be rescued from the Rings of Power, which I don't really believe is. But let's dive into this article to find out whether what they say is true or not. The article entitled Rings of Power's Galadriel showed how an elf could fall states that the Rings of Power revealed how the process goes, for elves to fall into darkness, thanks to Galadriel's journey in this show. Now, we all know that the Silmarillion exists, right? And we know that there it is stated that the elves fell from grace and somehow became orcs, right? But we also have many examples of elves not following what the Valar said, right? And the Valar, for those of you who do not know, are these powerful heavenly beings, like angels, if you will, that guide in a certain way mortal lives, and the so-called children of Ilúvatar. So, whenever an elf has decided not to follow that and go against the Valar, well, we can very well say that that is an example of a falling from grace in terms of elves, right? But apparently the article tries to use the Silmarillion to make a point, stating something that appears in the book itself that reads, quote, "Yet this is held true by the wise of Eresia, that all those of the Quendi, elves, who came into the hands of Melkor, ere Tupno was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved, and thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs." Now, it says there in the article that Tolkien dropped the idea of Melkor creating the orcs, but that's something that has been accepted and has been taken as, yes, this is part of the canon, that orcs are elves, and that's even further by Peter Jackson's adaptations. If you remember, Christopher Lee's Saruman talks to one of the Uruk-hai and tells him the story about the origin of the orcs, and he says they were once elves, right? So it's something that is part of the story already. And the article continues, quote, "The Rings of Power thus broke canon by introducing Adar, a fallen elf who had indeed been broken by Sauron. Adar is an elvish word that probably means father, and the Amazon TV series did indeed portray Adar as the creator of the orcs. In a surprising twist, it turned out Adar was operating independently of Sauron, operating under his own agenda for the sake of the orcs he ruled. This naturally raises the disturbing question of just how an elf can actually fall. No, not really, and I already told you. It is about reading the Silmarillion, reading the source material. But of course, that would also require the showrunners to have a modicum of decency, first and foremost, some intelligence for doing so, and also the rights to adapt that, right? But, well, the article goes with how Galadriel's journey in this thing shows that elves can fall from grace, and it says there, quote, "One striking scene in The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, answers that question. Galadriel eventually learned she had been played for a fool by Sauron, who had wormed his way into her confidence under the alias of Halbrand. The Rings of Power Season 1 ends with a confrontation between the two, and Halbrand attempts to tempt Galadriel to side with him. He offers Galadriel an alliance that will bring about her own more noble goals, the restoration of Middle-earth, if she will only agree to an alliance. Oddly enough, nothing Sauron says in this scene is a lie exactly. Tolkien's notes do indeed record that Sauron was obsessed with establishing order and peace on Middle-earth back in the Second Age, and that his desire ultimately morphed into a twisted longing for control and power. Sauron is tempting Galadriel to walk the same path with him. End quote. Now, that still doesn't show how an elf could fall, considering that this is not a fall for Galadriel as she opposes him, and then goes back to her friends and talks about wielding the creating the rings of power so that they can counter Sauron in a way. If you really want to talk about a fallen elf and use Galadriel as an example, just use any of the other dick moves that she carried out during the series. And you don't have to go that far. Well, actually, you will have to go very far, because you can go to the beginning where she treats her soldiers as garbage, because they cannot continue with the journey that she's trying to perform, right? So that alone is a very dick thing to do, and it shows a lack of consideration. You could also say that that is in a way a fall from grace, but you can also talk about how she is thirsty for revenge. And at the beginning of the series, one more time, it is revealed that she is angry that her brother was killed and she's looking for revenge. That alone is cause enough to call this a fall from grace. But if you followed the canon and you stopped doing all this stupid crap, you could also have a fall from grace if you considered that elves, the likes of Fëanor, for example, Fëanor, he created the Silmarils, the most beautiful jewels during the First Age and all that. And because they were stolen by Melkor and Ungoliant, he decided to leave the Valar, as he thought that they were just hindering him and pushing all the elves back, holding them, and decided to rebel against them and go to Middle-earth. That provoked that the elves were banned from returning to Valinor, and also there was like a curse on them, so that they could never really reach the Silmarils, and if they did get a Silmaril, that would be like a sort of doom for them. It would be impossible for them to have them all together one more time, and they would suffer greatly. And all that is a fall from grace already. You don't need to go all the length of this stupidity to try to convey that. And guess what? Galadriel was part of the group that left Valinor as well. She did not take part in any kingslaying, she did not take part in any destruction of ships, because in the end the Teleri were part of her kin as well, on the side of her mom, so she was not there. But she did travel to Middle-earth because she wanted to be her own person, she wanted to have a dominion of her own, and because of that, you could say that that ambition sent her on the path of going down, falling from grace, and becoming this fallen elf. She, sure enough, tries to redeem herself so that when she returns to Valinor, the ban that she had is lifted. She can do it freely. There is no problem with her going back. But that is part of the story. It's there. It's just that you never cared to look into that. That's the thing here. And of course, you didn't have the rights to much of that, but you could have just worked around it, couldn't you? The article continues, quote, Galadriel is sorely tempted in the Rings of Power. She seriously considers Sauron's words, which are carefully chosen to appeal to her own longing for peace and order. But that is not her falling in this thing, as I already told you. The fall actually happens before this. This is just temptation, just like the ring in the Fellowship of the Ring, It doesn't have anything to do. It's just that, once again, McKay and Payne are a couple of idiots, that don't know how this works. So there is no real fall in that particular scene that you have chosen. You have chosen poorly. But anyways, they want to have these parallels between Sauron and the devil because Tolkien was a Catholic and all that, and Catholicism was important for him. So it stands to reason that Sauron is a comparative to Satan or Lucifer, whatever you want to call him. Because Tolkien also loved allegory, right? Completely stupid crap. Once again, these people trying to defend the Rings of Power, they don't even know what they are talking about, really. They have got no clue of what they are doing. And every single thing that they have written, that they have spoken about so far, we can just debunk it by going back to the book, going back to the law. And if you do not believe me, just pick up a copy of the Silmarillion, read for yourself, you will find there all the answers. But of course, that is only my Viking view. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time.